Hey everyone, my name is Matt C, and welcome to Downtime Activities. Yes, I am the third Matt appearing on this channel, thus completing the Matt trick. So today I'm going to be showing you guys a commander deck that I built recently, and that deck is an Oloro Ageless Ascetic Politics deck. Now a lot of people are going to see Oloro and assume you're playing the Oloro Stacks build, so it's probably a good idea when you sit down at the table, if you don't know everyone there, to let them know that this is not the degenerate, horrifying Stacks build, and it is instead a fun political intrigue build. So what does Oloro do for us in a politics build? Well, for one, he gains us life every single turn, which is going to help us survive into the late game. And he also just has a card draw ability built right into your commander, which is super powerful. The deck does also have a bit of a pillow fort sub-theme, so gaining a lot of life is important when you're trying to defend yourself, because we do have some cards we're going to play that could make us the target of the entire table. To be honest though, the real reason I chose to build around Oloro is because I've had a copy of him for a long time, and I've been trying to find a way to build around him that wasn't an unfun stacks or pillow fort build. And this is what I've eventually settled on, is making him into a politics commander that I think adds a lot of fun for everyone at the table. I think this current build of the deck strikes a good balance between being powerful enough to survive some other powerful decks at the table, while also adding a lot of fun political interaction to the game. So let's jump in and take a look at the deck.
Like all commander decks, we're going to want to have some good ramp options. And luckily for us, there are some spicy political options we can throw into our ramp package. But first, for our boring, non-political ramp, we are running Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, our 3 guild signets, Mind Stone, Chromatic Lantern, and Myriad Landscape. Most of these are artifacts that ramp us and help fix mana, and Myriad Landscape is a fine way to add a bit of ramp into the mana base itself for little cost and some added redundancy. Next up, we have what I will call political ramp. First up are 2 kind of similar cards in Victory Chimes and Spectral Searchlight. The Searchlight lets us add any color, while the Chimes only tap for colorless, but the Chimes also untap during each other player's untap step. So we get the option on each of our opponent's turns to make a deal with them in exchange for the 1 extra mana they might need to cast a big spell or their commander. Next, we have Pendant of Prosperity, which lets us make an alliance with one of our opponents early in the game. The Pendant is another 3 mana artifact, but when we play it, we choose an opponent to give it to. From then on, that opponent can pay 2 and tap the Pendant to draw a card and put a land card from their hand onto the battlefield. Basically, it gives them access to a colorless growth spiral every turn. But every time that opponent activates the Pendant, we also get the same effect, so we'll be drawing extra cards and playing extra lands. Then we have a new card from the Strixhaven commander decks in Scholarship Sponsor. This card is sort of group hug oriented and can help us get the goodwill of the table. Sponsor is 3 and a white for a 3/3 human advisor, and when it enters the battlefield, each player who controls fewer lands than the player who controls the most lands searches their library for a number of basic land cards less than or equal to the difference, puts those cards onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffles. Often, this will mean every player at the table suddenly gets to catch up to whoever is playing green in terms of their land count. Next is another new card in Tempting Contract. A 4-mana artifact that has, at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent may create a treasure token. For each opponent who does, you create a treasure token. Obviously, this card doesn't really do anything if none of your opponents take the treasure, but in a deck built around making deals and bribes, it should be pretty easy to get at least 1 or 2 opponents to accept the contract each turn cycle. To finish out our ramp, we have an insanely fun card that adds a bit of a minigame to the round of Commander. And that card is Coveted Jewel, which is a 6-mana artifact that has, when this enters the battlefield, you draw 3 cards. And it taps to add 3 mana of any one color. So where's the downside? Anytime 1 or more creatures attack you and aren't blocked, the player that controls those attackers draws 3 cards and gains control of the jewel and untaps it. This is hilarious, as it often adds an element of everyone fighting over this coveted jewel into your commander game. Of course, it also paints a big target on us while we control it, so we're going to want to have some ways to defend ourselves. That's why the next section of the deck is dedicated to putting up some defenses or taxing our opponents for coming after us. First up in this category are 3 very similar cards in Propaganda, Ghostly Prison, and Windborn Muse. Each makes it to where opponents have to pay 2 mana for each creature they want to attack us with, which could keep us safe if an opponent has other things they need to do with their mana that turn. In a similar vein is the new card, Nils Discipline Enforcer. Nils lets us give creatures our opponents control +1/+1 counters on our end step, but makes it to where each creature can't attack us unless their controller pays X, where X is the number of counters on the creature. This lets us add a tax to one of our opponent's powerful creatures to maybe prevent it from attacking us, but it can also be a bribe if an opponent really wants that +1/+1 counter on one of their creatures. Of course, if one of your opponents has a counters-based deck, Nils makes it extremely difficult for that deck to attack you. Next is a card that literally has the word bribery in its text box. Speaking, of course, of the amazing Gwafa Hazid, Profiteer, who is a 3-mana 2/2 that lets us pay white, blue, and tap him to put a bribery counter on target creature we don't control, and the creature's controller draws a card. As long as Gwafa Hazid is alive on the battlefield, creatures with bribery counters on them can't attack or block. Basically a repeatable pacifism effect that is sort of a bribe since we're giving our opponent a card, but also is shutting down dangerous threats. Crawl Space is next, and this is one of our most powerful defensive cards. It's a 3-mana artifact that simply says, no more than 2 creatures can attack you each combat. Straightforward and effective. Mystic Barrier is 4 and a white for an enchantment that says, when Mystic Barrier enters the battlefield or at the beginning of your upkeep, choose left or right. Each player may attack only the opponent seated nearest him or her in the last chosen direction, and planeswalkers controlled by that player. This lets us choose which opponent on our left or right seems the least threatening, and make it so that only they can attack us. It also helps if we have become the target of the table, as it only allows one opponent to attack us each turn cycle instead of everybody. You know, if the bribery and political negotiations have completely fallen apart. The next 3 cards all disincentivize our opponents from attacking us in some way. Stalking Leonin makes opponents have to worry we might have chosen them and will get to exile their best creature. Cunning Rhetoric lets us draw cards off of our opponent's libraries if they attack us. Teysa, Envoy of Ghosts, is a fantastic blocker with protection from creatures, and also destroys any creature that deals combat damage to us, turning it into a 1/1 flying spirit for us instead. Next up is the Face Commander from the new Commander 2021 Strixhaven deck, which looks like a fun commander in its own right, Brina, the Demagogue. Brina is 1 white-black for a 1/3 legendary bird warlock with flying, and whenever a player attacks one of your opponents, if that opponent has more life than another of your opponents, that attacking player draws a card and you put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature you control. Sabrina helps protect us by incentivizing our opponents to attack each other instead of us. Now for a pretty strange card, Fate Spinner. Fate Spinner makes our opponents choose to skip their draw step, main phase, or combat phase each turn. Since most of the time, your opponents will probably choose to skip their combat phase, this kind of pacifies and slows down the aggression of the whole table, as most people are going to want to be able to draw their cards and play their cards every turn. I think most of the time people will skip combat. Illusionist Gambit is a hilarious card that basically takes a big attack coming at us and redirects all of those creatures to our other opponents. This can lead to the attacker having to make some really unfavorable attacks and losing their board, or forcing them to wipe out one of our other opponents instead of us. Great. Guardian Archon lets us keep our opponents guessing who we chose, and when the chosen opponent does try to come after us, we get to completely blank at least one effect or attack they are targeting at us. And finally, in this defensive category, we have a couple of land cards that can completely blank a creature in combat, with Maze of Ith and Mystifying Maze. Creatures can't attack you if they can't find you, so trapping them in a maze is a great option. But of course, huge flavor fail that Minotaurs aren't immune to these cards. Come on, WotC. But now you're probably wondering, why do we need all this defense if we're not really doing much to make ourselves a target? Well, we're going to paint a target on our back by declaring ourselves the ruler of the table with some Monarch cards. For those of you who haven't seen this mechanic, a card like Thorn of the Black Rose will make you the Monarch. That means that you get an emblem called the Monarch that lets you draw an extra card during each of your end steps. But if a creature an opponent controls deals combat damage to you, the emblem goes under their control instead, and now they're the Monarch. This is clearly unacceptable, so once we are the Monarch, we'll be doing anything we can to defend ourselves. The 4 Monarch cards in the deck are the aforementioned Thorn, as well as Palace Jailer, who exiles a creature for as long as we remain the Monarch, which might actually incentivize some of our opponents to help us keep the monarchy. Knights of the Black Rose adds a slight drain effect whenever an opponent takes the crown from us, and Protector of the Crown helps us keep our regal status by taking any damage we would take for us, at least protecting us from one attack. Obviously, all of our defenses won't stop every threat at the table, so we will have to run some targeted removal to help save ourselves from sticky situations. But since this is a political deck, we're going to be running some wacky political removal rather than the uber-optimized cards you might see in another deck. For getting rid of permanents and creatures, we have Council's Judgment, Oblation, Deadly Designs, and Zundersplit's Judgment, which all help to eliminate or slow down threats, but all with a political wrinkle thrown in just for fun. Then I'm running Sower of Temptation, which lets us steal the best creature of whatever opponent won't accept us as Monarch and refuses our bribes. Finally, Split Decision is a weird voting card that lets the table decide whether an instant or sorcery spell gets countered, or we get a copy of it. Now, targeted removal is great and all, but sometimes we're staring down an army of, say, 1 million ants. So we're gonna want a way to get rid of all of them for a single card. Now, Supreme Verdict isn't really very political. In fact, it's probably the least interactive board wipe in the game, but it's insanely good, so we're just gonna go ahead and run it. The rest of our board wipes are very fun and political to make up for it. Magister of Worth, Coercive Portal, Promise of Loyalty, and Tragic Arrogance all let us wipe the board, while also gaining some opportunities for political deal-making. Coercive Portal in particular is really fun, as it lets the board be wiped only when at least half of the players vote to wipe it. But if they don't vote to destroy all non-land permanents, we instead get to draw extra cards, which is awesome. The final, and arguably most important section of the deck is a slew of cards that have various political effects, ranging from extortion to bribery to straight-up group hug and cooperation. We have a few more fun voting cards in Plea for Power, Custody Squire, Capital Punishment, and Expropriate. Expropriate. We've got a string of symmetrical effect cards in Scheming Symmetry, Keen Duelist, Tempt with Reflections, Intellectual Offering, and Infernal Offering. All of these let us give an opponent a benefit as a bribe, while we also get to reap the same benefit. We can bribe and cooperate with opponents with Mind's Glow, Duelist's Heritage, Orzhov Advocist, Rogue's Passage, and Mikokoro, Center of the Sea. Each of these cards let us give our opponents various benefits as bribes and as pawns in political deals throughout the game. Next up are some wacky and difficult to categorize political cards in Order of Succession and Cruel Entertainment. Order of Succession lets us choose a direction, and everyone gains control of a creature controlled by the next player in that direction. And Cruel Entertainment lets us choose 2 players, which can include ourselves, and make those 2 players control each other for their next turns. The best way to use it is probably to let the 2 opponents who've been swinging back and forth at each other suddenly get to mindslave each other for a round. We do also want some good card draw and cards to synergize with our commander Oloro, so we're running Dream Trawler, Drogskull Reaver, Stinging Study, and Sphinx's Revelation. Now, I won't be going through the entire mana base in this video, as you can check it out in the link in the description below. It's nothing too exciting, but there are a couple of land cards I would like to point out. First up, Field of Ruin is a card that can have some political implications if used creatively. And Mystic Sanctuary, a card that lets us grab one of our fun political instants and sorceries back later in the game.
So that's going to do it for my Oloro Politics deck tech. As I mentioned before, a link to the full deck list will be available on tappedout.net in the description below. If you have any thoughts about the deck, any cards you would add or take out, you can go ahead and throw that in a comment below, as well as any other feedback you have for the video. And while you're down there, a like and subscribe would be hugely appreciated, as we are still a very small YouTube channel, so any support we get is amazing right now. Thanks so much for watching. Now go forth and slay dragons, sling spells, roll dice, and enjoy your downtime activities. See you next time.